The hat landed in the mud on a Tuesday morning, and nobody in Creston Hollow said a word. Not one word. That alone should have told you something about the kind of town it had become. A place where people looked at their boots when wrong was done in front of them. A place where silence had been mistaken so long for peace that nobody could tell the difference anymore. The old man stood in the middle of the main street, his white hair exposed to the October wind, his pale eyes tracking the hat where it had fallen. He didn't lunge for it, didn't shout, didn't even blink. He just stood there with the stillness of a man who had learned, through long and terrible years, exactly when to move and when to wait. The one who knocked it off was named Cord Dellray, 23 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had never been on the wrong side of consequences. He laughed when the hat hit the mud. His two companions, men who went wherever Cord went because thinking for themselves had always seemed like too much work, laughed right along with him. "Pick it up," somebody in the small crowd whispered. Not to Cord, to the old man. The old man said nothing, and that was when things in Creston Hollow started to change. Though nobody realized it yet. Before you find out what happens next, if this story already has you leaning forward, hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us now. Drop a comment telling us what country you're listening from. These frontier stories travel farther than you might think. Now stay with me until the very end, because what's coming will stay with you long after the fire burns low. The old man had arrived in Creston Hollow 3 days before the hat incident. Came in on foot, which was unusual, carrying a single canvas pack over one shoulder, which was more unusual still. Most travelers rode in with horses and luggage and the kind of noise that announced themselves. This man arrived like weather, quiet, total, and suddenly just there. His name, when he gave it at the boarding house, was Amos Teel. He paid 2 weeks in advance with coins that were old and worn smooth, the kind of coins that had changed hands more times than anyone could count. He ate his meals alone, walked the town slowly each morning like a man relearning how to exist somewhere, and spoke to no one beyond what courtesy required. What people noticed, when they let themselves look closely, was the hat. It was a remarkable piece of leather, dark brown, shaped and reshaped by decades of weather. On the inside band, if you looked, there were stitched initials in faded red thread. Not AT for Amos Teel. Something else entirely. Something nobody in Creston Hollow thought to ask about. Along the left side of the crown, barely visible unless the light caught it right, was a small 5-point depression in the leather. Like something had once been pinned there and removed long ago. Like something had left its mark even after it was gone. The hat mattered to Amos Teel the way certain things mattered to certain men. The way the last photograph of a dead wife matters. The way the deed to land you built with your own bleeding hands matters. Not because of what it was worth in dollars. Because of what it had survived. Cord Dellray didn't know any of that when he knocked it off. Cord Dellray didn't know much about anything, if the truth were told. The trouble started, as trouble often does in small towns, over something that seemed small. Amos had been sitting on the steps outside the general store, eating an apple slowly, watching the morning go about its business. Cord and his companions, Rue Birch and a half-awake man called Skeeter, came swaggering down the boardwalk with a particular energy of young men who have not yet been genuinely afraid of anything. Cord stopped when he reached Amos, looked down at him, then looked at the hat. That's one ugly piece of leather, old-timer. Amos bit into his apple, said nothing. "I'm talking to you." Cord nudged Amos's boot with his own. "Where'd you dig that thing up?" "Off a dead man." Amos looked up at him then. Just looked. And for exactly 1 second, something crossed Cord Dellray's face that he would have denied feeling later. Something cold. Something instinctive. The same feeling a dog gets before lightning strikes. Before it can hear the thunder. Before it even knows what's coming. Then the moment passed, and Cord pride filled the space where the cold feeling had been. He reached down and knocked the hat off Amos's head. It hit the mud with a soft, final sound. Cord laughed. Rue laughed. Skeeter laughed, though he didn't fully understand what at. Around them, the people of Creston Hollow went quiet. Meredith Crane stopped sweeping her porch. Old Floyd Hatch froze in the doorway of his barber shop. The Dunbar brothers, passing with a wagon, let their horses slow without realizing they were doing it. 20 sets of eyes. 20 people watching. Not one step forward. Amos Teel looked at the hat in the mud. Then he looked at Cord Dellray, and he made his gesture. He reached down, picked up the hat, turned it once in his hands, checking it the way a man checks something precious for damage. Brushed the mud from the brim with 3 slow, deliberate strokes of his thumb. Then he placed it back on his head, adjusted it by the brim, and returned to his apple. That was it. That was the gesture. And the entire village went silent in a way it hadn't been silent in years. Not because of what Amos did, because of how he did it. Because in 30 years of living in Creston Hollow, not one person had ever seen a man pick something up from the mud and somehow, impossibly, make the man who put it there look small. Cord felt it. His smile flickered. His jaw tightened. "You just going to sit there?" Amos finished his apple, set the cord down neatly on the step beside him. "Son," he said finally, his voice quiet enough that people had to lean in, "I've been where you are. I thought silence meant weakness, too. Spent the better part of my youth making that mistake." He stood, slowly, the way old men stand when their bones remember too much. "You're going to have a long life or a short one," Amos said, looking at Cord directly. "Which one depends entirely on whether you learn the difference between a man who can't fight back and a man who's simply choosing not to." He walked away down the street. Nobody laughed. That evening, Floyd Hatch came to find Amos at the boarding house. Floyd was 60, owned the only barbershop in Creston Hollow, and had seen the town change from something decent into something quietly frightened over the past 3 years. Since Cord Dellray's uncle, a man named Amos Dellray, had bought up the south grazing land and decided that owning land meant owning people. Floyd sat across from Amos at the small table in his room and got straight to it. "That boy's going to come back with worse than words," Floyd said. "His uncle won't allow the embarrassment." "I know," Amos said. "Then why'd you provoke him?" Amos looked at the hat on the table between them, turned it once with one finger, slowly. "I didn't provoke him," Amos said. "I refused him. There's a difference. Provocation wants a fight. What I did was something else." "What was it?" Amos was quiet for a moment. "I was showing your town something it's forgotten." Floyd looked at the hat, then at the man, then at the hat again, and this time he noticed the depression in the leather where something had once been pinned. His throat went tight. "Who are you?" he asked, though something in him already suspected. Amos picked up the hat, held it in both hands. "A long time ago, I carried a badge in 3 territories," he said simply. "Wore it right here." He touched the depression. "Took it off in 1871 because I was tired of burying good men and leaving their towns no safer than I found them." "Then why wear the hat?" Amos set it back down. "Because the hat never hurt anyone. The hat was just the hat. And every morning I put it on. It reminds me what I am, what I was, and what I swore I'd always be willing to be again if the moment asked it." Floyd Hatch rode home that night thinking about those words for a long time. Amos Dellray came the next morning with 6 men. Creston Hollow had seen Harlan's arrivals before. He rode in the front, always, with his shoulders back and his chin up and his eyes moving over everything like he was calculating its value. The townspeople recognized the formation. It meant somebody was going to have a bad day. Amos was at the same spot on the general store steps. Same posture, same stillness. A cup of coffee this time instead of an apple. Harlan dismounted and stood over him. "I'm told you disrespected my nephew yesterday." Amos sipped his coffee. "Your nephew knocked my hat in the mud. My nephew was having sport. You made him look foolish in front of the whole town." "No," Amos said. "He made himself look foolish. I just didn't help him hide it." Harlan's face darkened. He was not a man accustomed to this, to calm, to words delivered without heat or trembling. He was accustomed to people rushing to apologize, to explain, to give ground. Amos gave none. "You're going to stand up," Harlan said. "Walk out of my town, and not come back." Amos looked up at him. "Your town," he repeated, as though the words tasted strange. "That's right. Floyd Hatch built his shop in 1863, Amos said, his voice steady, conversational almost. Meredith Crane's family has worked their property since before the war. The Dunbar boys were born here. Their father's buried on the hill east of the church." He took another sip. That's whose town this is. The 6 men behind Harlan shifted. Hands moved, the kind of silent signals that said things were about to go further than words. Amos set down his coffee cup, stood, and then he made his second gesture. He reached up, removed the hat, held it out in front of him, brim up, and looked into it for a moment the way a man looks at something he's been carrying a long time and knows the exact weight of. Then he turned it over, showed Harlan the inside of the band. The stitched initials that weren't AT. They were USM, United States Marshal. He held it there for 10 full seconds. Not speaking, not threatening, just showing. And one by one, the 6 men behind Cord Dellray stopped moving. Because the oldest one, a man named Cal who had ridden with hard men in harder times and knew things the young ones didn't, went pale as chalk. He leaned forward, looked at those initials, and then looked at Amos Teel's face, and then at the depression in the leather crown where a badge had once lived. "Harlan," Cal said quietly. "Harlan, we should go." "What?" "We should go." Cal's voice had dropped to something between a whisper and a prayer. "Right now. We should ride out right now, and we should not come back." Harlan turned to him. "What are you talking about?" Cal pointed at the hat, at the man holding it. His finger was not quite steady. "You know the name Amos Teel?" Harlan shook his head slowly. "Before 1871, Cal said, they called him the Boundary Man, because wherever the law ended, wherever decent folks had run out of options and hard men thought they owned the ground, that's where he drew the line." He swallowed. He cleaned out the Ramirez Syndicate in New Mexico, brought in the Galt brothers single-handed after they'd killed 2 posses, walked into Yellow Creek when it had 14 gunmen dug in, and walked out with 11 prisoners and 3 graves. The silence in Creston Hollow was absolute. He took off the badge. Cal continued, because he was tired, not because he couldn't. He looked at Harlan with the eyes of a man who has survived enough to know when not to push. "If that hat means what I think it means, then standing here right now is the worst mistake you've ever made." Harlan looked at the hat, at the initials, at the depression in the leather, at the man holding it with hands that did not shake. Then he looked at the windows above Main Street, and he noticed for the first time that Floyd Hatch was standing in the doorway of his barbershop with a rifle he'd not had yesterday. That Meredith Crane had come down off her porch and was standing on the street. That the Dunbar brothers had climbed down from their wagon and were not walking away. That the town of Creston Hollow, for the first time in 3 years, had stopped looking at its boots. Cord Dellray was many things. Greedy, cruel, accustomed to deference. But he was not stupid. He remounted his horse. He rode out without another word. His 6 men followed, and Cal was last. And as he passed Amos, he slowed just enough to nod once. The nod of one old soldier to another. Recognition without ceremony. Amos nodded back. Then he put his hat on, picked up his coffee, and sat back down on the steps. They asked him to stay, of course. Floyd Hatch came back that evening with half the town behind him. They stood in the street below the boarding house window and made their case. A man like him, they said. A man with his history, his gifts, his steady hands and steadier eyes. The town needed him. Wasn't it plain as daylight? Amos listened to all of it from the window, hat in hand, turning it slowly by the brim the way he always did when he was thinking. Then he came downstairs. He stood on the porch and looked at them. All those faces. Good people. Frightened people who'd found something in themselves today that they'd been missing so long they'd almost forgotten its name. "You don't need me," he said. "You needed to be reminded." "That's different." "What were we reminded of?" Young Jacob Dunbar asked from the back of the crowd. Amos looked at him, at the boy's face, young and open and soaking in everything. "That a man with nothing left to prove is the hardest man in the world to frighten," he said. "And that courage isn't loud. Half the time it looks like an old man sitting on some steps eating an apple. It's not the noise, son. It's the decision underneath the quiet." He stepped down into the street, shook Floyd's hand, nodded to Meredith, touched the brim of his hat to the crowd. "Cord Dellray won't come back," he said. "Men like that need people to believe in their power more than they need the power itself. You stop believing today. That's finished." He picked up his canvas pack from beside the door. "But if he does," Floyd called after him, "if he comes back with more men, with guns, with worse." Amos turned. And for the last time, he made his gesture. He reached up, touched the brim of the hat. Just once, just lightly, the way a man touches something sacred that has carried a long road. Then you'll know where to send word, he said simply. He walked out of Creston Hollow the same way he'd arrived. Like weather, quiet, total, and then suddenly gone. But the town he left behind was not the town he'd found. They talk about it still in Creston Hollow. Not the fight, because there wasn't much of one. Not the threats or the guns or the history of a man who'd once been called the boundary man across 3 territories. They talk about the hat, about an old man reaching down into the mud, brushing away the filth with 3 slow strokes of his thumb, and placing it back on his head with such absolute dignity that somehow the man who'd knocked it off looked like the smaller of the 2. They talk about how a single gesture, quiet as snowfall, can carry more weight than 1,000 bullets. Floyd Hatch tells it best. He tells it to anyone who'll listen, but especially to the young ones, the boys who come into his barbershop with that familiar fire in their eyes and that familiar certainty that size and speed and noise are the same thing as strength. He tells them about the hat, about the initials inside the band, about the depression in the leather where something important had once lived. And then he tells them what Amos said about courage, that it isn't loud, that half the time it looks like nothing at all, like an old man sitting still while the world tries to rattle him, like a hand that doesn't reach for a weapon, like a silence so deep and so certain that every man in earshot feels it in his chest and understands, without being told, that he is standing across from someone who has already decided what kind of person he is, and nothing in this world is going to change that today. The kind of man who picks up what the world throws in the mud, brushes it clean, and wears it like a crown. That, Floyd Hatch will tell you, is the most dangerous thing there is. Not speed, not fury, not numbers, just a man who knows exactly who he is, and is no longer afraid to let you see it. If this story rode with you all the way to the end, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe so you never miss another tale from the frontier. And drop a comment below telling us where you're listening from, because these stories travel the world and every corner of it deserves to hear them. Until next time, partner, keep your head up and your hat on.